This is a Reliant Robin. No, Del Trotter never drove one of these, and no, it's not called a Robin Reliant. It's one of the most important cars ever launched in Britain, and it's also one of the most famous.
The Robin is of course a three-wheeled car, launched in 1973 as a replacement for the old Reliant Regal. The entire point of having a three-wheeled car, and the very reason it was so successful, was a quirk in British law. At the time, any three-wheeled car under about 400 kilograms was legally classed the same way as a motorcycle, so you didn't need a full licence. That's where a lot of the Robin's customers came from, and it's the same reason why cars like this don't exist anymore.
The weight limit of about 400 kilos or so led to some clever design innovations. It was penned by Ogle Design, who also did the Reliant Scimitar and the Bond Bug, and at the time it was very distinctive.
Here is a car launched in 1973 with no gutters and a modern hatchback rear end, although this one's the estate, so not quite a hatchback. As with all Reliants, it's made from fiberglass for added lightness and for penny pinching. Everything was cheap, everything was light, and everything was very, very focused. Take the engine. It's Reliant's own 850cc four-cylinder producing 40 brake horsepower, and it's very light. It had to be in order to meet the weight requirements, and it's a very good engine too. It's relatively powerful for its size, it's very efficient, and they're hardy little units. It also makes a great raughty little noise. One of the natural issues with a three-wheeled car is where to put the wheel. If you put it at the back, there's no boot, and in doing so you'd have to push the driver right up to the front of the car in order to get a little bit of luggage space. And that would sacrifice what little crash protection there was. So naturally, the single wheel was at the front, just in front of the engine, which drove the rear wheels. And that did mean that the engine had to be pushed back a long way in the chassis, so it does take up quite a lot of room. But it did mean that the weight distribution was better and you had twin-driven wheels. It's worth remembering the Robin's four-wheeled brother, the Reliant Kitten. The Kitten is basically the same car as a Robin, but with the engine moved slightly forward into the space where the Robin's front wheel would be. So if you want a light, eager little fiberglass car with four wheels, then there you go. The Robin wasn't your only choice. When it was launched in 1973, the little Robin was bang up to date. The interior was modern, being constructed mainly of plastic, and the aforementioned external design features. On the back, the rear window is your hatchback, but of course this particular one is an estate, so you have a side-hinged rear door. The styling too matched small cars of the era. I particularly like the front end of these Mark I Robins. The big round headlamps give the car some personality that I think's missing from later Robins and Rialtos.
This particular Jubilee Robin is an estate, which means you get a full opening rear door. And that leads to a really quite large load space. I mean, you have your spare wheel propped up against the side here. Of course, there's nothing under the boot floor because that's where all the drivetrain is. But for such a small car externally, there's an awful lot of space internally. One thing that's really clear to you as soon as you sit inside is how close you sit to the door. I mean, yes, this is quite similar to a lot of cars of the era, but the massive transmission tunnel in the middle means that you feel really, really penned up against this door. In front of you is this really little tiny three-spoke steering wheel with a big R for Reliant in the middle. And it has to be small because there's not really very much room in here, and as you can see my legs are quite close to the steering column, but it's a very, very small car, so it has to be. And behind the steering column you have two clusters, one with your water temperature and fuel level, and the other with your speedometer in. And you have a curiously placed warning light in the middle there, which is hidden by your third spoke of the steering wheel. All the auxiliary switches are on these little rocker arrangements here, so you have obviously your windscreen wiper and your lights and your heater fan. And on your right hand side you have hazard lights, your pump for your wash. There you go, there's a little bit of stuff coming out. And this switch here at the bottom is for the spotlights, which you'll see on the front. Of course, the indicators are on your right hand side. There's obviously right indicator, left indicator and horn. Will it work? There you go. And of course, if we move the curious Reliant Regal of the Trotter brothers, you have this black plastic dashboard, which is really quite modern for the early 1970s. It certainly matches the designs of other manufacturers. And this radio here only just fits. It's one of the common annoyances with Robins, is that they're not the correct size for a single DIN head unit, although this one does just about squeeze in. Here you have the switch for your heated rear window. Here you have two gauges, one for your oil pressure and another for your battery voltage. And in the centre here you have this little tiny little heater vent, which I'm not sure how much heating that does, but either way. And below that you have a very, very plain dashboard really from here down. You just have your heater pull, hotter and colder, and then your choke, of course. And below this you have a little ashtray. There's no cigarette lighter in this one, although I believe the cigarette lighters would have been in the centre of the glove box, which is a really weird place, but that's the way they were. But of course, this glove box does mean you have a nice amount of storage there, despite having no lid on it, and a blank for another switch here. The door cards are extremely basic. In fact, the door pockets on this one are not particularly connected, but they also act as the door pull. And they're quite nice door pockets. They've got a little bit of room to them, considering the car is so small. And door handles, I believe, out of the BL parts bin, but as was everything on every British car of the time. And manual window winders, all in chrome for the Jubilee Robin. In the centre here you have this little tiny snickety little gear shift. Look at that for a gear throw. The lovely little gear throw there, even though it does feel a little bit disconnected in neutral. And of course you have your handbrake on top of the, as previously said, enormous transmission tunnel here, and the tunnel here for the engine. Because behind this carpet here is the engine. Of course the engine has to be pulled way back for that front wheel. It's even worse on the passenger side, where there really is, even if we do move that, there is very little footroom. Up top you do get a couple of sun visors. The passenger one has a mirror in it too. I suppose that's what you call luxury. And in the centre there is an interior light. It's the little things, isn't it? And then you have peak 1970s. You have these non-inertia reel seat belts, which are an absolute nightmare and are barely even worth using. You do get some nice little period bits, Britax branding, Decca branded speaker, which of course just sits there and is wired in. But that obviously would have been for an original radio, not this modern Sony CD player. And you can tell just how small this car is by the ease with which I can just reach over to the back seat there. And the tiger print is inevitably going to get lots of trotter comments. But this car seems exceptionally practical for the size. I mean, you can fit two people in here. I'm not so sure you'd call it comfortably. You could get two people in here, but uncomfortably you could easily get four in here. And that is plus quite a massive load space at the back in this estate. Considering the size and the dinky little 850cc engine, this car makes a lot of sense. For a family wanting a second car, or people wanting to move down a size, or people moving up from motorcycles, this car made perfect sense for a lot of people at the time, and that's why there are so many of them about. Right, it's another two-door car with little rear seats. Here we go again. And in peak 70s style, there are no latches on the seats, so in a forward impact you just get catapulted against the dashboard. But here we go. Oh. And there we are, and that is me in the back of a Reliant Robin, and that seat is moved all the way back. It's as far back as it will go. It is too far back for me, so it's not terrible for rear leg room. There is a bit of room, even if I do have to do a little bit of man spreading. And I suppose if I really don't like the driver, I can just insist he leaves the seat there. So, not actually very uncomfortable in the back here. I mean, yes, the seat is rather hard, but it's so thin as well, and it's so cheap that it doesn't really matter. Amazingly, for a car from 1973, there are no unpainted surfaces on the top of the doors. It's all covered in plastic, which for a car this cheap and a car of this age is really quite remarkable. Now, this isn't any old Reliant Robin. This is a Robin Jubilee, built to celebrate the Queen's Silver Jubilee in 1977. Originally they built 500 of them, but demand was quite high, and so they added an extra 250, making 750 cars in total. Every Jubilee got its own individual badge at the front, so you could tell which number it is. This is one of the last ones, as it's number 721.
People like Jeremy Clarkson and unnamed forum members may lead you to believe that Robins will fall over in a slight breeze, and to be honest, they will roll over, but only if you're a colossal tit. Having 3 wheels is naturally less stable than having 4, it's just a fact, but you never hear anyone complaining that their motorbikes fell over. The 3-wheeled layout wasn't Reliant skimping in any way, it was the reason this car was a success, and the reason the kitten wasn't. If it didn't matter, this car would have 4 wheels, but the innovative men and women at Reliant knew that there was a market they could exploit, and they did it perfectly.
The Robin is a favourite of those so-called journalists who write articles like 10 worst cars ever, despite having never sat in any of them. But what strikes me about this is that it pretty much single-handedly kept a small company in Tamworth going for years and years and years. And it was so crucial to the mobility of thousands of people in the UK and sold in such relatively good numbers for the kind of car it was. I fail to see how that can be such a bad thing.
Reliant saw the market, took the initiative, and built one of the most important cars in the history of Britain. Thank you very much for watching. If you've made it to the end, why not consider liking the video and subscribing as well? And hopefully, I'll see you in the next one.